This kind of feels like a sermon that ought to take about 3 minutes. And I'm going to show my main point pretty early, and then I have about 20 minutes of filler to fill up the time. The movie clip comes from a movie, Midnight Clear, that was directed by Dallas Jenkins, produced and directed by Dallas Jenkins, who also produced and directed The Chosen. It's a Christmas movie, so this takes place on Christmas Eve, where a woman whose husband has had a stroke, her car breaks down, and a gas station attendant is helping her just out of the goodness of his heart, and they have a meaningful conversation. And the whole movie kind of speaks of purpose and little steps towards purpose. But the clip itself brings up some important conversation pieces or some questions. For example, what becomes of our purpose when we lose our abilities? Talks about her husband who's had a stroke and how now it feels like he has no purpose. And so the question becomes, does a person who's lost their abilities have purpose? And they both speak about how we treat those who cannot, quote, contribute. Those who have become what many would call less useful. But then what do we do when our gifts feel unuseful? I talk to people occasionally that feel like they don't have much to offer, they're not very talented, or they don't see themselves as very smart, or don't think they have a skill set that's very helpful. What do we do about that? Or even worse, what do we do when our talents are lacking and you feel like you're without purpose? And so these questions as a whole dive into kind of how much does purpose have to do with ability? How much does purpose have to do with usefulness? And it begs questions like, what about a person who's incapacitated or an infant child? Does an infant child have purpose? Or what about an infant child with disabilities? Or the frail or the infirm or the aging? What is the usefulness of such people? Those with little talent, those whose abilities have little demand. What about those who feel lost when it comes to contribution? And they're interesting questions, but they have like this baked-in failing point inside them. And most people embrace the following equation. Purpose equals function. Most people, if you say, what is your purpose? They're going to list something functional. I think we could all agree. If we said, what is your purpose to somebody? We would get answers similar to this. To live a happy life. To be a good mother. To run a successful business, to win athletic events, to encourage others. So you get from vocational stuff, basically, to more spiritual stuff, encouraging others, showing hospitality, using my gifts and talents to share the gospel. You might hear from a Christian, if you said, what is your purpose? My purpose is to do missions overseas. Or my purpose is to pastor a church. Or my purpose is to sing in the choir. And what you'll notice is in all of these, and I want to just say wrong, and that's wrong. It's tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but these all assume purpose equals function. And then that gets back to the question about what about a person who has a stroke? Do we just disqualify that person, or a person who is of little talent or lower intellect, lower ability? Do they have purpose? They all say purpose is functional. You might say, my purpose is to love God and love others. And I'd say in doing so, you're getting closer to purpose. But even if still you mean by doing the thing of loving, it's still functional. If it means to love God as a function or as a usefulness, or to love others as a system of doing things for others, we've still failed in the fact that we're relating purpose to function. And this is where I show my hand. This is where I could just walk away from the sermon, and it's not a drop the mic moment at all, but I think your purpose is belonging. And belonging is completely different than function. Belonging is completely different than utility. Belonging still applies to the woman whose husband has had a stroke, to the man who's had a stroke, to the aging and infirm, to the children, and so forth. Or another way to phrase it, you might say, your purpose is to be the beloved, or to be loved. I did something really cute with the word beloved. Did you notice it? To be beloved is to be loved. I have to confess that I have a vested interest in this kind of sermon right now. because of my disease. And I don't know how functional I'll be for the future. I'm hoping and praying and believing that I'll be functional for the next 30 years, 40 years, and life will be just fine. But I have to have these conversations with my wife because I'm not able to help her around the house as much as I once was. I have to take more naps, and I have to spend more time at the gym and so forth. And so it feels personal to me to talk about function versus purpose. And what I've discovered with my wife is that this belonging thing is really important to her. She's there for me no matter what happens. That speaks of belonging, and that means my purpose to her is not about what I do. It's not what I'm capable of. It's not, in some sense, it's not how useful I am. It's simply about presence. It's simply about relational connection. And I would say that carries over into every human being. That your purpose is not function. Your purpose is not capability. Your purpose is not usefulness. But it's belonging. It's belovedness. It's relational. So then when we get back to our questions, what becomes of our purpose when we lose our abilities? How do we treat those who cannot contribute? Quote, contribute. What do we do when our gifts feel unuseful or lacking? This idea that your purpose is now belonging and your purpose is to be beloved is belovedness. It gives dignity to the question, to the people that are the targets of these questions. So when we ask the question, what becomes of our purpose when we lose our abilities, something that feels really close to home for me right now. Nothing becomes of our purpose. It remains the same. It always has been, it always will be about belovedness. It always has been and always will be about belonging. Nothing changes. There's a dignity in that. There's a love for humanity in that. What becomes of our purpose when we lose our... sorry, I asked that one already. How do we treat those who cannot contribute as if they belong? And we have to reframe contribute. So if by contribute you mean usefulness, by contribute you mean something utilitarian, then this question makes sense. But if by contribute you mean being, belonging, belovedness, then no one ever fails to contribute. No matter their situation, no matter how bad things get, no matter how the rug is pulled out from under them, whether things are great or things are poor, their contribution is not what they do. It's not how useful they are. Your contribution is not what you do. It's not how useful you are. It's in being. It's in being the masterpiece that you were created to be. It's being in the son or daughter of God, the child of God, and in belonging. And nothing changes. And we treat people the same. What do we do when our gifts feel unuseful? We rest in knowing that our purpose has nothing to do with giftedness. It's not about your usefulness. It's not about your gifts. It's about your being. It's kind of about your substance. So it begs the question, is this true? And that's where we get back into our sermon, the FOAS, the father of all sermons, which we're going to wrap up at the beginning of the year because we missed a Sunday last Sunday. Normally at Christmas, we kind of transition and we talk about Jesus. Hopefully we talk about Jesus a whole lot in here because he is the center of everything that we do and why we do it. But normally we do a Names of Jesus series over Christmas. Jesus the Redeemer, Jesus the Prince of Peace, Jesus the Table Turner, and so forth. But I felt pretty good about foregoing that tradition around here because we're in the Last Supper discourse. We're in this cozy moment where Jesus sits down with his friends before he dies and shares a meal with them. And that still feels, it's a little Good Friday-y and it's a little bit Easter-y, but it's also Christmassy as well. So I cheated the system and we went with this. So we're going to get into the text. Jesus has just prayed that his followers would be united in the purpose of glorifying God. And we talked about that word glorify and how it means in the Hebrew, the Hebrew translation of the Greek word, or the comparable translation, is basically heaviness. It's the tangible weight of the thing. And so we talked about how we're supposed to be united because he's praying for all believers everywhere. This isn't just for the disciples in front of him. He literally says, I'm praying for all that will follow me. And that means you and me. He prays that we would bring the tangible presence of God into the people we come in contact with. He prays that we would glorify God, that we would bring the heaviness of God's presence into the world and make a difference in the world. And then he continues. He continues with this very weird verse that I wanted to skip, but I'm not going to skip. That way we can say we read it all. While I was with them, I protected them and kept them safe by that name you gave me. None has been lost except the one doomed to destruction, so that Scripture would be fulfilled. Well, I figure nothing feels like Christmas more than talking about the damnation of Judas. So we're not going to. I'm going to cherry pick today. I'm going to do it honestly. We're going to skip over this verse, except to say that now we've read the whole thing. And 2, Jesus doesn't sugarcoat. It's not all tinsel and mistletoe with Jesus. He tackles the hard stuff. But he does continue. He says, I'm coming to you now, but I say these things while I'm still in the world, so that they may have the full measure of my joy within them. Quan preached a sermon 3 weeks ago on joy, and I really appreciated it. He talked about joy in travel, joy in fishing trips, joy in returning home. Joy in the sunshine and joy in the rain was kind of his theme. In all things, joy. And Jesus, in this wonderful setting of relational context with his friends, sharing a dinner with them before he dies, in his last meal, with his last words, says basically, I'm sharing all this with you guys so that you can have all my joy. Joy is an important part of the FOAS, of the Father of all sermons. And he says it's an expression of, he prays that they will have the full measure of his joy. He goes on to say that sometimes things are going to be hard, but there's this joy that's available, and it comes from him. It's his joy. It's not something we conjure up. It's not something that we can manufacture. It's a gift. And he continues. He says, I have given them your word, and the world has hated them, for they are not of the world any more than I am of the world. My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Again, not all tinsel and mistletoe is here. He says, some people will hate you. The bearers of joy will be despised by some. But then he goes on to pray, and he adds these words. He prays for this. And he repeats a word 3 times. He says, sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I have sent them into the world. For them I sanctify myself, that they too may be truly sanctified. And you're a pretty intelligent crowd. You've probably spotted the word by now. It's sanctify. Sanctify them by truth. I sanctify myself that they may be sanctified. It kind of feels like dozens of times in my life, because I've been a follower of Jesus for decades now. I've heard sermons about sanctification or sanctify. And rightly so, in every example that I can think of, the pastor has translated sanctify to mean set apart. Sanctify equals set apart, and this is true. But it becomes kind of frustrating because in every sermon that I can think, and I'm not thinking of specific sermons, I'm thinking more broadly that I have heard a lot of sermons on this topic, and it feels like every sermon took set apart to mean withdraw, to shelter from, to protect oneself, to avoid or retreat. And that misses the mark of the word. The word is hagiazo in the Greek. And it does mean sanctify. Hagiazo does mean sanctify, and it does mean set apart. But the sermon at this point is supposed to go something like this. Like this is the typical, it's not said this directly, but it's pretty much implied. Don't be like those sinners. When they say sanctify and they equate it to set apart, they mean back off. Set apart means to get away. Don't be like those sinners. Stay away from the world. Be spiritually elite and hide in a holy bubble. Now, these things are never literally said, but they're kind of implied. And the reality of it is, the truth is, there's something to be said for that definition of sanctify. Alcoholics should not hang out in bars, is a kind of decent proverb to look at. There is something to be said for, instead of become spiritually elite, there's something to be said for become spiritually mature. And set yourself apart in that you are pursuing Jesus where other people are not necessarily pursuing Jesus. So there's some validity to the sermon. but it kind of misses the mark as well. What happens with this, and I promise we're going to get around to purpose in a moment. What happens with this definition is walls of fear of corruption are built. So when it says to be sanctified is to separate oneself, and by separate oneself it means to withdraw or retreat or not be like the world or be different, so to speak. Then it sets up walls between you and the other, or between the church and the non-church. And the walls are there because of the fear of corruption. And then what happens is there's a coin flip between either shame if you don't stay separate in such a way, or pride if you do. And both of them are ugly sides of the same coin. And it's interesting that the typical sermon about sanctification becomes such a withdrawal or retreat because Jesus just got done saying, my prayer is not that you take them out of the world. So he said, my prayer is not retreat. My prayer is not withdrawal. My prayer is not building walls, but that they would be protected within. They would be protected as they engage, as they move forward. Not retreat from, but retreat for. So sanctify does mean set apart, and it typically is preached as sanctify equals set apart from, which misses the mark. It's incomplete. But when drawn out, sanctify, hagiazo in the Greek, means instead of set apart from, means set apart for. And there's a very important difference in the two. Here's some Old Testament passages that would have been translated in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, where hagiazo appears. It says, hagiazo them so that they may serve me as priests. So the priests are consecrated or set apart. Their lives are dedicated. So hagiazo in this passage means set apart, as in dedicated to or consecrated for. It has nothing to do with withdrawing from anything, but instead of it's moving forward into something. So that these priests are consecrated, hagiazoed. In that same passage, it says, take some blood from the altar and some of the anointing oil and sprinkle it on Aaron and his garments and on his sons and their garments. Then he and his sons and their garments will be hagiazoed. So again, the garments are purified, consecrated, sanctified. In Leviticus, we read, then Moses took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle and all that was in it. That was a lot of oil. And hagiazoed them. I'm picturing Moses just with the buckets of oil, just throwing them all over the place. If he's doing the whole tabernacle, it's a lot of oil, which is a lot of olives, which is a lot of farmers, but that's just me to think about. He sprinkled some of it on the altar 7 times and anointed the altar and all its utensils and the basin and its stand to consecrate them. This consecrated is the same word. It's repeated twice. The whole temple is hagiazoed, sanctified. And the temple isn't fleeing anything. The temple is being dedicated for, consecrated for something. And so we find out in the scriptures that hagiazo is to sanctify, and sanctify is to set apart. But it's not to be set apart from. It's not to fear, create walls, avoid corruption. It's set apart for a purpose. So now is the point in the sermon where I'm supposed to transition to purpose. And I've heard that sermon too. And you probably have as well. And what is the pastor supposed to say your purpose is? Your purpose is to discover and use your gifts, give resources, serve, do. We've all heard the sermon. I've preached the sermon several times in my life. When it comes to purposes, your purpose is to find your gifts and fulfill your gifts. And I think we missed the mark because then we end up right back at the same situation where now we're equating purpose with utility, purpose with usefulness. If you want to have purpose, you do. If you want to have purpose, you serve. If you want to have purpose, you give. If you want to have purpose, you discover your gifts and use them. Again, purpose equals usefulness or utility. And I think in the Father of all sermons, Jesus would say, Or Jesus does say that's not right. That's another incorrect, wrong. And so we're going to kind of summarize the entirety of the FOAS in just 3 slides. And you're going to see a theme here. So we've already talked about the Last Supper discourse for many weeks now. This is week 15 of it. And we've covered all these passages you will have heard in the last several months. But now we're going to look at the big picture view of these passages to see what is Jesus talking about when he's talking about sanctification, when he's talking about set apart for. Can we find some clues within the sermon to what that for is, what that purpose is? And I think there's a theme. It's small text because there's a whole lot to cover, but we're going to talk about it. These are direct quotes from the sermon. Having loved his own, he loved them to the end. We see a theme of belonging and belovedness right at the very beginning. Belonging and belovedness. He loved them till the end, having loved them. His own. His own speaks of belonging. This belongs to me. This is my pulpit. This sermon, this is my own. So from the very beginning, you see this expression that says belonging. You belong to God. Relationship with God. Unless I wash you, you have no part in me. Part in me speaks of belovedness and belonging. Whoever receives the one I send receives me. Receives me speaks of belonging. And again, I won't comment on each one of them, but we will read them. I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, you may be also. I want you to be with me. Maybe I will comment on each one of them. No one comes to the Father except through me. Coming to the Father is belonging and belovedness. I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. He will give you another comforter. He lives with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Do you see a theme of belonging and belovedness here? And this is the entirety of the sermon. When Jesus was going to die, this is what he wanted to be remembered. This sermon was the stuff. This sermon were his last words, and last words are important. When people speak their last words, we lean in and listen because we know they're important. And almost everything he says through the entirety of the sermon is, you are beloved and you belong. That is your purpose. He continues, I am in my Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. We will come to him and make our home with him. Abide in me as I abide in you. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Abide in my love. You are my friends. I have called you friends. I chose you. I have chosen you out of the world. He will take what is mine and declare it to you. The Father himself loves you. Again, the theme continues. Belonging, belovedness. In his last words, his final instruction, his closing statements, belonging, belovedness, purpose. It continues, I am not alone, for the Father is with me. You gave him authority over all people, he's speaking of himself, to give eternal life to all you have given me. Given me speaks of belonging. They were yours. Yours speaks of belonging. You gave them to me. Gave them speaks of belonging. They are yours, he says. All I have is yours, and all you have is mine. Belonging. Holy Father, keep them. Belonging. That they may all be one, just as you are in me and I am in you. Father, I want those you have given me to be with me where I am. Given me, with me, belonging. It's consistent throughout the whole sermon. When we pick it up in chunks, it might be easy to miss. But he concludes with this idea of being sanctified in the truth. He says his word is truth. Sanctified, set apart for. So he talks about all this stuff about belonging, being within God, ownership by God. And then he sums it up by saying, set apart for this thing of belonging. Slide 1, again, belonging. Slide 2, belonging. Slide 3, belonging. Or if you prefer, be loved. Be loved. Be loved. Hagiazo means to sanctify, and sanctify means to be set apart for a purpose. And now we've discovered what our purpose is. And the purpose is belonging. So this begs the question of what does belonging mean in this? Does it mean owned or included? Because there's multiple definitions of belonging, and belonging could be ownership, like this is my pulpit. I own this pulpit. Or belonging could be about like inclusion. I have a sense of belonging. When I enter the room at Daylight Church, I feel like I'm a part of the family there. So which are we talking about? Are we talking about ownership or inclusion? And the answer is yes. They both work. We have this kind of surrender of ownership of our lives to Jesus. And so in the passages we saw, there is this idea that they are mine. They belong to me. We submit ourselves to God. But in doing so, we become a part of his family. He says, I have called you friends, and so forth. And so both definitions work. I said it was a short sermon with a theme, and the theme is your purpose is belonging. To put it another way, that sermon that I'm supposed to preach is your purpose is to do. Your purpose is to give. Your purpose is to serve. Your purpose is to find your gifts and use them. Many times there's this idea within the church and outside the church that determines your usefulness determines your purpose. And I want to flip that on its head. I'm sorry, your usefulness determines your belonging. So in order to belong to the church, belong to God, to express the ownership of God in our lives, there's this list of stuff that we're expected to do. And then it's implied, or it kind of becomes baked into us to think that that's where we get our sense of belonging. And I think this sermon, this Last Supper discourse of Jesus flips us on its head. So now no longer is belonging determined by purpose, but purpose is determined by belonging. Usefulness doesn't determine belonging. Belonging determines what you do. And so it's subtle, but it's important that we belong and thus do, not that we do and thus belong. There's a song in the Hunger Games Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes that I thought was appropriate here. She says these words. She says, "Nothing you can take from me was ever worth keeping." And she repeats it, "Nothing you can take was ever worth keeping." There may come a day for me where I'm no longer as useful as I once was. That day may come for you. The day, as far as this world and this life, is going to come for all of us. But belovedness cannot ever be stolen. Usefulness is not the moniker of belonging or belovedness. Sorry, that was bad word usage. It's not the mark of belonging or belovedness. It can't be taken from you. You might, like me, be worried about, have I done enough? Am I doing enough? Am I accomplishing enough? Am I serving enough? Am I helping enough? Am I giving enough? But that's not where it's at. Those questions are subsidiary questions to what's really important. And the question is, am I belonging? And the answer is resounding, yes, you are. Am I beloved? Yes, you are.